Welcome back. Now, the first ship carrying grain has left a Ukrainian port under a landmark deal with Russia. Turkish and Ukrainian officials say the ship left the southern port of Odesa early today. Russia has been blockading Ukrainian ports since February. While the two sides agreed a deal to resume shipments, it is hoped the deal will ease the global food crisis and lower the price of grain. Turkey said the Sierra Leone-flagged vessel, the Razoni, would dock at the port of Tripoli in Lebanon, adding that further shipments were planned over the coming weeks. The Joint Coordination Center set up in Istanbul under the deal said the ship was carrying some 26,000 tons of corn and was expected to arrive at Turkish waters for inspection on Tuesday. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres welcomed the departure of the ship and hailed Turkey for its role in working to implement the agreement. According to Ukraine's Infrastructure Minister Alexander Kubrakov on Facebook, it says today Ukraine, together with partners, takes another step to prevent world hunger. Unlocking ports will provide at least $1 billion in foreign exchange revenue to the economy and an opportunity for the agricultural sector to plan for next year. Mr. Kubrakov added that 16 other ships were waiting to depart in the ports of Odesa region in the coming weeks. Last month's deal brokered by the UN and Turkey took 2 months to reach and is set to last for 120 days. It can also be renewed if both parties agree. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba called the shipment a relief for the world and urged Moscow to respect its part of the deal. Under the terms of the deal, Russia has agreed not to target ports while shipments are in transit, and Ukraine has agreed that its naval vessels will guide cargo ships through waters that have been mined. Turkey, supported by the United Nations, will inspect ships to allay Russian fears of weapons smuggling. 3 ports in southern Ukraine, Odesa, Chernomorsk and Pivdeni, are expected to be the focal point of the exports. In the meantime, the Kremlin has reacted, saying that news of the first ship carrying grain to leave Ukraine's port of Odesa under a deal brokered by Turkey was very positive. The Sierra Leone flag Razoni is expected to reach Istanbul 12 GMT Tuesday, where it will be inspected by personnel of the Joint Coordination Center, comprising representatives of Ukraine, Russia, Turkey and the UN, after which it will proceed to reach Tripoli. And to how it all started, a key global supplier of grains, Ukraine has struggled to get its product to buyers due to a Russian naval blockade of Ukraine's Black Sea ports. The blockade trapped tens of millions of tons of grain, stranding many ships, worsening global supply chain, along with Western sanctions stoking food and energy price inflation. Moscow denied responsibility for the crisis, blaming sanctions for slowing its own food and fertilizer exports in Ukraine for mining approaches to its Black Sea ports. However, under the stewardship of the UN and Turkey, Moscow and Kiev signed the landmark deal for safe passage for ships carrying grain out of 3 southern Ukrainian ports. Here's a timeline on how we got to this point.
Ukraine is the world's 5th biggest exporter of wheat and in the top 3 for maize, barley and sunflower seeds. Following Russia's invasion, Ukraine faced a severe shortage of capacity to store even it reduced 2022 grain harvest. And according to the U.S. World Food Program, the country struggles to maintain exports.
Production of wheat in 2021 was approximately 40 million tons, and another 50 million tons for the other 3 commodities. Before the conflict, Ukraine used to feed the world. Now they need help to feed themselves.
The European Council President Charles Michel, who visited the strategic Ukrainian port city of Odesa on the Black Sea on May the 9th and held talks with Ukrainian Prime Minister on possible measures to unblock Ukraine's ports for grain exports. Russia's blockade of Ukraine's Black Sea ports forced grain exporters to look for other transport alternatives. UN Food Chief David Beasley has appealed to Russian President Vladimir Putin to allow export of grain stored in Ukrainian ports.
It's essential that we allow these ports to open, because this is not just about Ukraine. This is about the poorest of the poor around the world who are on the brink of starvation as we speak. So I ask President Putin, if you have any heart at all, to please open these ports.
Speaking at the annual World Economic Forum in Davos in May, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said Russia was using food supply as a weapon with global repercussions, acting the same way as it does in energy sector.
We are witnessing how Russia is weaponizing its energy supplies. And indeed, this is having global repercussions. Unfortunately, we're seeing the same pattern emerging in food security.
At the Philadelphia Union Convention on June the 14th, U.S. President Joe Biden said that temporary silos will be built along the border with Ukraine, including Poland, in a bid to help export more grain and address a growing global food crisis.
Confidence Macari is a geopolitical analyst. He joins me now for more. Hi, Confidence. Thanks for joining me. And finally, it's a sigh of relief as the first ships from the port of Odesa have set sail after inspections, coordinated corridors, and all. This is good news for the world, isn't it?
Yeah, you can say that it's good news for the world. I mean, moments after the deal was announced, the price of wheat fell tremendously on the global stage. So it's quite a relief, not especially for Ukraine, but especially for countries who need these grain imports much more worse than other people would. I'm talking about Lebanon, where the Rezoni is set to birth tomorrow afternoon. You know, Lebanon is chosen as one of the countries to receive the first grain exports from Ukraine's southern ports because of its dire situation and its government struggling to get its food subsidies up and running, and then the cost of its economic crisis from 4 years ago, and all of that. So yes, you can say that it's a win, and then it's also a strategic win for global cooperation since the start of this conflict.
And Confidence, you know, last month's deal, which was when they did the signing in July, was thrown into chaos less than 24 hours after it was announced that, you know, Russia had launched 2 missiles at Odesa port. Some people are still skeptical with regards to this deal that's supposed to take 120 days. I mean, something could still go wrong. Yeah,
the key difference between the deal that was sabotaged by Russian missile attack and this one is that the former one did not have the fine details of cooperation between both sides that would ensure monitoring to avoid weapons smuggling that this current one has. I mean, much of Russia's key concern is that the war has progressed this long, much away from its strategic goals within the first 3 months that it invaded, because of what it described as Western support, continued Western military support for Ukraine, which it fears that is going to be made worsened by an opening of the port, which is also key to why it mined shipping lanes from Ukraine's southern seaport. So yes, that is a key difference, and yes. The questions arise concerning Russia's credibility, concerning its treaty obligations, not necessarily in this particular one where it has agreed to allow exports leave the seaports, but in terms of the general perspective on whatever peace deal that could be eked out from this conflict going so far. But at least this one has set sail. And I think whatever positive that can be drawn is going to be central into going to any negotiations to end the war going forward.
And the Turkish presidential spokesman said he's hopeful the grain export deal signed between Turkey, the UN, Russia, and Ukraine can pave way for peace talks. Can we be optimistic?
Well, as I said earlier, this particular deal is a win for global cooperation, and even the Turkish spokesperson himself has said, sorry, he said that we can only hope, and we are cautiously optimistic of how much of an impact this would be. This particular deal was brokered by the United Nations, Turkey, and both factions talking about Russia and Ukraine now. And for those who are not aware, the centrality of Turkey to these negotiations is essential to the fact that they control the Baltic and all the sea routes, the shipping routes that pass from Russia and Ukraine down into the Middle East, where most of these and to the Mediterranean, where the ships are going to pass from. So if the talks are quite optimistic about this, about what this particular peace deal may mean for cooperation between both sides as a view to ending the war, I think for a step back, it will need to go through, it may need to look at the record of agreements keeping between both sides when during the first time when Turkey tried to intervene in the conflict in the early stages of the war between February and March by trying to host peace talks in Istanbul and what came out of it. So on one hand, you have a dark history to look back on and say, okay, no, we haven't made much progress. But for wheat prices to fall just 24 hours within the announcement of the New Deal, which Turkey helped to broker, I think it could be a positive that they could take away and say perhaps there's actually peace on the horizon.
And, you know, over the weekend, we saw some moves by President Vladimir Putin signing a new naval doctrine that casts the U.S. as the main rival, setting out Russia's global maritime ambitions for crucial areas like the Arctic and the Black Sea. Is Putin spoiling for a fight?
You could say that. You could say that, but you could also understand from Putin's perspective that the decision to name the United States as Russia's #1 strategic adversary is not really done in isolation, given that if you look at the strategic doctrines of both the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and several American-led international alliances between America and its partners in the Pacific, there's usually a specific target, especially military objective or a military adversary in mind. The G7 strategically adopted China as its #1 threat, and within the same year, NATO also did the same thing. And so we are quite seeing the bipolarization of the world across East and Western fronts. It might be a Cold War 2.0, it might be something greater than the Cold War, but for Putin to actually come out and call the United States a strategic adversary, you could see in one particular aspect that it is a response to America and its Western military doctrine of choosing a particular military strategic adversary. In the past, NATO strategic doctrine used to contain Russia as its #1 strategic threat. But recently, with the rise of China, we have seen China actively replace Russia in that particular one. So you could see from one particular angle that Russia is merely responding to what it perceived as US tradition of naming its particular strategic adversary. On the other hand, its focus, the naval doctrine rather focused heavily on the geopolitics of the Arctic. And you know the kind of politics that goes on in the Arctic now is what the Russians are trying to do basically is trying to look for a northeast passage from Asia down to Europe, which the Russians are going to control. So it's all about the politics of water in the sense that the Arctic is a very strategic location for the Russians to control. And they are not actually waiting for the Arctic ice to melt. They're melting it themselves. Given the quantity of ice-breaking machines between Russia and the United States trail very far behind. Russia has about 16 icebreakers, and the United States has only 2. So you could see on one hand that the Kremlin is not waiting for the ice to break. And of course, the concern for environmentalists saying that the rapid breaking of the ice through man-made equipment is going to offset so many environmental disasters, diseases, and the rest of that. But the Russians are not waiting and sitting around. So we are looking at the future right now, where people in the West are trying to prepare for the future, and they also in the East, they're also trying to play catch up. And the opening up of the Arctic, geopolitics of the Arctic, I think is going to take cooperation between both sides to a different level that we haven't seen in the previous years.
President, do hold your thoughts there. Let's listen to the Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, who said that Moscow would soon be proposing a time for a call with U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, in which Blinken has said he wants to discuss an exchange of prisoners held in Russian and U.S. jails.
We first learned about the proposed call by U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken when we were in Africa, and he spoke on TV saying he was intending to get in touch with me over the phone. About a day passed before we received the official request. We are now coordinating over timings for the call. It should take place when I'm in my office. Clearly, that's unlikely to happen today. In the upcoming days, we will propose a suitable date to our American colleagues. Regarding the topics, we ask them to specify the issues they want to discuss. We have not received an answer yet, but apparently they have already spoken to the media outlets about that too. If we're talking about a prisoner swap between Russia and the United States, then the Foreign Ministry has already commented on that. This topic was discussed over a year ago during the Geneva meeting between Presidents Putin and Biden. There they agreed to authorize competent people to deal with these issues. The Foreign Ministry is not one of them. Nevertheless, I will listen to what he can say. Regarding the Ukrainian grain, it will probably be interesting to see how they're going to fulfill the commitments they've made in the context of the UN Secretary General's initiative. If we're talking about Russian grain, it was the American sanctions that did not allow the signed contract to be fully implemented. And regarding Ukraine and all the rest, I've heard Tony Blinken say he would not discuss Ukraine with me because the Ukrainians should represent their interests themselves, and the Americans have no right to work for them. But let me remind you, about a week ago, in one of my interviews, I said we don't have any prejudice against talks with Ukraine. At that very moment, a State Department...
So we've heard the Russian foreign minister there speaking on a lot of things, but talking about U.S.-Russia relations, he said Moscow would soon propose that time for that discussion, talking about the offer U.S. basketball star Brittany Griner and former Marine Paul Whelan detained in Russia, and I believe in exchange for a convicted arms trafficker, Victor Bout, jailed in the U.S. as part of such a deal. Do you think that this call will hold? We know that both men, or maybe the U.S. and Russia, haven't really spoken since before the February 24, Russia sent troops to Ukraine.
Yeah, as you rightly mentioned, the conflict in Ukraine sort of severed relations and soured relations between both countries very deeply. As regards the question of whether that call will hold, I think it's more likely to hold, given how much we are approaching the midterms much towards the end of the year, and given President Biden's very detailed approval ratings in the country, I think this is a good showing. This is also time to get something to show to much of the voters during the midterms. We've seen inflation being the central point of Biden's similar popularity ratings in the country, and so I do think that given the high level exchanges we've seen between both foreign ministries, I think it's much more likely to hold. But on what the Americans are willing to give back in return of Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan, I think it's much more a question of if they're willing to make that kind of a prisoner swap. Perhaps by the time the call takes place, a different person might actually have to be in the running. It might be, but I do think as regards your question whether the call is going to hold, yes, it's actually going to hold, and such negotiations are going to take place.
Let's look at what happened over the weekend. Authorities in Mykolaiv are saying that widespread Russian bombardments overnight killed at least 2 people. But yet again, we saw the attack on Olenivka detention facility. Moscow denied the attack, saying it's open to investigation. The ICRC, I believe, is on it, but they said they haven't been allowed to go in. Russia blamed the Ukrainians. Ukrainians are blaming the Russians. What do you think happened?
This is mostly a case of he said, but I do think that we will not really get the clear picture of what exactly happened until months after an investigation has been launched. As to the possibility of an independent investigation, I do not have much faith in that. We are seeing the Russians say that the facility was hit by a high mobility artillery weapon system. That's the HIMARS missile strike, which is launched from Ukrainian territory. And then on the other hand, we're hearing the Ukrainians say that it was actually the Russians that used flamethrowers to hit the prison. And I have to add that the prison actually holds members of the Azov battalion, which sections of Russia's politicians have called to be executed after they were arrested a few months ago from the Azov state plant. So on one hand, if you look at the circumstances behind their arrest and behind their detention, sorry, you could say that the Russians are behind this attack. Sorry, but given how much the Russians have put out saying that they are actually not the ones behind the attack, the kind of circumstances we've seen over the past 3 days, it doesn't really leave for much independent thoughts going into that. So I think to ascertain the level of the damage and who might actually be likely to be responsible for this, we'll have to leave it in the coming days to see if an independent investigation will be allowed into this. But overall, it actually does not look good for either Russia or for Ukraine.
Confidence Makari, geopolitical analyst. Always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me on the program.
Thank you for having me once again.
Well, according to the Kremlin, the Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline's equipment has malfunctions that require urgent repairs. Now, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that the situation needed a fix, which Russia has little ability to help with. The delivery of a Nord Stream 1 gas turbine to Germany from Canada after maintenance was not in line with the contract. This is according to a Gazprom executive last week, signaling a deepening of a row in which Russia has cited turbine problems as its reasons for cutting gas supply via Nord Stream 1. Anatoly Chubais, who quit his post as a Kremlin special envoy due to the war in Ukraine, has been hospitalized in Europe with a rare autoimmune disorder that attacks the nervous system. Chubais has been diagnosed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, a disease caused by the immune system damaging the peripheral nervous system. Russian reporter and political activist Ksenia Sobchak quoted him as saying this on Telegram. It was unclear exactly where in Europe the 67-year-old Chubais, who left Russia immediately after resigning in March, was hospitalized. He could not be reached for immediate comment. Mr. Chubais, who once served as former President Boris Yeltsin's chief of staff, served as President Vladimir Putin's special representative for ties with international organizations before his resignation. Meanwhile, the Kremlin has wished him a speedy recovery, saying it was saddened by the reported hospitalization of Anatoly Chubais. Kremlin spokesperson told reporters that Russia stands ready to assist the ex-presidential advisor if he appeals for help.